This episode is brought to you by techpartner.news. Our sister channel publication CRN Australia is rebranding to techpartner.news on the 1st of April. Make sure you bookmark techpartner.news in your browser, subscribe to the newsletter, and register for our lineup of events including Pipeline, the Impact Awards, Channel Meets, the MSP Index Program, and Fast 50. Hello and welcome to the iTnews podcast. Our guest this week is Matt Bright, the Senior Manager of Emerging Technology and Efficiency at UniSuper. UniSuper is moving into the next stage of its AI journey, exploring agentic AI use cases as a tool to assist financial advisors in the first instance. It comes about 6 months after the superannuation fund gave all 1,200 of its staff access to Microsoft 365 Copilot, with both initiatives part of a broader push to harness AI technology to improve member experience. We begin with Matt explaining the emerging technology function at UniSuper. It would just be useful, I think, to understand a little bit about your functional area at UniSuper in terms of emerging technology. Is it aligned to the technology function or does it sit outside the technology function?
I sit in the enterprise architecture function within technology, so within the broader delivery and information function at UniSuper, which is technology and projects in essence. It's then been expanded to also incorporate emerging technology. The focus of my role is to play a really big bridging act between the technology capabilities that are emerging. Generative AI is the core component of that presently, but also inclusive of other types of emerging technology, such as robotic process automation. So I play a real bridging role addressing business challenges with these emerging technologies. I also have a function, and this is part of the reason why I sit within technology, to support the architectural governance of our consumption of different types of technologies, and also looking at making sure that we're planning for what's coming down the pipeline in the next 3 to 5 years as well. Generative AI is the hot topic at the moment, but quantum computing is also coming in the upcoming years, so it's that forward-looking view as well.
When you say you're a bridging role, you're coming from the enterprise architecture side. So is most of this work that you're doing technology driven or technology led, or is it business led?
With generative AI, the way that we've approached it is there's a real balancing act that you need to achieve between technological capabilities, identifying from within our existing tech stack what capabilities are there, and also more broadly what's out there in the market, but being able to match that back to business challenges that come up. We do try and be guided as much as possible by business priorities, business problems, because we think that's the core benefit that AI provides, is that it's addressing existing and historical challenges. My function is there to make sure that we're making the most of the capabilities we have within our tech stack, but equally where we've got defined business problems that can't be fixed within our existing tech stack, looking at what options are out there.
You mentioned that the planning horizon was around 3 to 5 years. Is that aligned to a business strategy or is it aligned to a tech strategy or both?
It's a combination of making the most of what we have now and where the capabilities are now, but also from a planning perspective, looking at it and saying, what are the disruptive forces that are potentially coming down the pipeline over the next couple of years? I say 3 to 5 years, and that's not a set structured number, but it's really AI snuck up on everyone pretty quickly and became impactful really, really quickly. That's the general consensus around the industry. So how do you plan for what comes next? There's a big part of my function, which is looking at what's the next thing that's coming down the pipeline. How do we prepare for that? What impact is that going to have on us from a technology perspective and then also from a people perspective?
Just so I understand from a strategy perspective, because you're sitting within technology, your work feeds up into a rolling technology strategy, or does it feed into a business strategy? How does it land in terms of the forward planning inside of UniSuper?
It's a good question. So we obviously have our UniSuper strategy that's in place, and a core component of that is around productivity and efficiency, which is a big focus of where generative AI fits within that. Like more funds, we're under increasing pressure and scrutiny from a cost perspective, from an expenditure perspective. There's absolutely a real focus and intent at UniSuper to make sure that we're as productive and efficient as we can be. I do feed up into the technology strategy we have within a target state architecture, which outlines from a systems perspective where we want to operate, what are our strategic platforms, what are our legacy systems that we're looking to move off. So it's probably a bit of a roundabout way of saying that I feed into both the business strategy and the technology strategy. And that's the core message around linking between the technology capabilities that we have within our strategic platforms, but then trying to address some of our strategic priorities and business problems.
You've touched on a few different technologies, AI and generative AI, robotic process automation. I think quantum was one you mentioned as well. Does that encompass the main focus areas from your perspective, from an emerging technology standpoint?
It does. And I think to that point, the priority at the moment for us is generative AI and the impact that that's having on our people and our ability to shape the way in which we work and the way in which we can look at historic ways of working and shift those towards being more productive and efficient. We all have a strong customer focus with our member base, and we've got some really strong ambitions around delivering personalised experiences for our members that we'll also address with generative AI being a part of the solution for that. But at the moment, our primary focus is on productivity and efficiency, and how do we leverage the capabilities that we have from a generative AI point of view to shape the way in which we work and be as efficient as possible, and have our people spending more and more time doing higher value add roles that are specific to their skill set and less of the manual administrative type work that does take up a lot of the calendar and a lot of people's days in the current landscape.
So UniSuper was part of the early access program for Microsoft 365 Copilot. I'm just wondering, where did Copilot come up in the planning work that you were doing? Are you mostly a Microsoft shop, or are you mostly office-based in terms of productivity and collaboration?
We're a risk-led business. We're a regulated fund. When we went down the path of looking at the initial trial of Copilot, my function didn't actually exist at that point. I was sitting in line one risk for technology and projects. So my background's risk and compliance. So it's a bit of a niche background to get to where I am now. But we were addressing the risk that we felt that ChatGPT posed. It came from the clouds. Everyone started using it, both within their work lives and within their personal lives. And we wanted to make sure that we had a really risk-driven response to that. And part of that was looking at how do we get a safe and secure option that our people can use internally within our own environment that provides a lot more ability to control and to make sure that we're operating in the way in which a regulated fund would be expected to be. We are absolutely an M365 shop when it comes to Teams and the Office suite of products. So that was the natural starting place for us, is that we wanted to identify what's the appropriate option for us to give our people a safe and secure way to try and start to leverage Gen AI and to look at what the art of the possible was. We went down that path with Microsoft, getting access to their early access program for 300 people. We didn't roll that out all at once, though. As you can imagine, quite a big step change, and the change management impact of trying to train 300 people at once when the foundations of what generative AI is and what it isn't were still quite new when we were going through that. So we took a really staggered approach. We set up a working group of really interested people with some executive sponsorship from our Chief of Staff, our Chief Risk Officer, and our Chief Technology Officer. And we identified the right people across each of our different business units to take part in the very early phase of that proof of concept before we then rolled out a number of different releases of different teams and people to get to that 300 number during the course of our trial.
A couple of things to unpack there. You mentioned, firstly, a quite broad sponsorship there from an LT standpoint, pushing this forward.
Yeah, it comes from the position that we want to be risk-led. Our risk team was really important in making sure that we were really comfortable that Copilot was the right solution for us to start to explore that risk-secure approach. Obviously, from a technology standpoint, we're talking about technology. As a fund, our technology team is really keen to be at the forefront of how we can make the most of generative AI. And then from a strategic perspective, our Chief of Staff looks after our enterprise strategy. So we wanted to bundle those three core tenets together. So your strategy, your risk, and technology to deliver the outcome for our people.
So you mentioned the trial cohort was around 300 employees. How did you go about the selection process? You briefly mentioned that these were interested parties, but I'm assuming there would be more than 300 interested parties within the organization potentially.
Yeah, so the first wave that we did was just a handful of people from each business unit. So we identified what we were calling AI champions at the time from across each business unit. So that's encompassing of people, it's encompassing of risk, a member team, a marketing growth team, technology, finance. All of our business units or divisions were represented within that. And we essentially took it as a learning process. We gave out about 30 licenses in the first wave. We did it really small for about a 4-week period of time, I think it was. So we wanted to make sure that we understood all of the little things that worked well, all your little tips and tricks. What are the things that don't work well before we tried to push that out to a much broader cohort? We did some foundational training with Microsoft to get people up to speed on the do's and don'ts. That was around understanding, if we roll this out to 300 people, what's the change impact? What's the learnings we need to take away to successfully deliver this? And I think the biggest thing we took away was that it's less and less about the technology, and it's more and more about the capability and the confidence in using the technologies. Our people and culture team with representatives from learning and development and also our change management functions were really at the forefront of that. They've really led the early access program for us. We learned quite a bit from that early phase. But I think the other thing that we also learned during that is that the Copilot product was evolving at speed. When we first got access to it, it absolutely had some limitations. It evolved quite quickly. The product is getting better and better by the day, and certainly did throughout that phase. So as we did our second and third and fourth rollouts, where we had our champions coordinate with the leadership team of each business unit as to who was going to participate in the second and third and fourth rollouts, we had to evolve our training and change processes because the technology was changing. It was getting better, different features, so it wasn't something that sat there as a rinse and repeat. And that's something that we've taken all the way through, is that it's constantly evolving. You can't ever sit there and say, yes, we've delivered appropriate training, our teams are equipped, they know what to do. You have to constantly reinforce, re-educate, and help them through that because the tooling is continuing to improve.
Mention a whole bunch of functional areas of the business, like growth, marketing, risk. When you were putting licenses into those areas, was there any context or documented idea of what each group might be able to do with those things? Were there any suggestions as to how they might use it? Or was it really just a full-on experimentation of see if you can find value from this?
It was less about trying to instruct them on how to use it, but we were looking at specific role types. We wanted people that use the M365 product regularly. We wanted people that send a lot of emails, that do a lot of reporting, that are in teams, that are having calls. We wanted people that were going to harness that, because if you look at the way in which someone that's in a back office role will use that M365 product versus someone that's in a member services function where they spend most of their day in the call center talking to members coming in, the way in which you're going to use it's pretty different. We wanted to focus on the roles that use the Microsoft products quite regularly. So we gave a little bit of a steer as to these are the kinds of roles and these are the kinds of capabilities it has to try and shape for those teams who might be the right fit within their own areas. But we didn't want to say, for example, finance, this is how you're going to be able to use it, and then really be directive. We didn't want to limit that. So we left that part open, but gave enough of a steer around these are the types of roles that we think are going to benefit from it. And equally, these are the types of things that you can do based on the early experiences we've had with the tool.
When you were talking about confidence before and people gaining confidence with the tool, the people that were already involved in this from an early stage are people that were fairly comfortable within the 365 ecosystem. So would have had a base level of confidence going in to know what they could potentially automate or query or prompt in terms of that ecosystem, I guess.
Absolutely. That's spot on.
Just on the topic of confidence, the government trials in Australia are probably the most reported on in terms of the way that they've analysed post-trial what they got out of the experience. And one of the things that came up a lot in that was confidence, that staffs were given a tool, but not necessarily the training in how to extract the most value from it. And it kind of goes back, I think, to what you were talking about around not specifying what the different functional areas might be able to get out of using the specific tool. I wonder how you balanced all these things in terms of you wanted an outcome from putting this tool in, obviously, and from giving this tool to staff. How did you go about giving them the confidence that they could get the most value out of what they were being given access to?
It's a really good question. It's certainly, I think, a challenge for anyone when you're trying to do large-scale technology change management. I think the importance throughout the early access program was that we did constant and repeat training. It wasn't, we trained everyone at the start and we said, this is how you use it, do your best for 6 months, and then we'll come back for some feedback at the end of it. It's the constant check-ins. We had a shared community that we set up through Teams, which was share your learnings, share your wins, share things that work well, share things that don't work well. Try and source answers to questions from your peers. But then also we had drop-in sessions and we had the ability for people to log confidential issues or concerns, things like that. Because I think what we found is that it was less about people being confident in how do I use it, but people wanting the ability to ask what they might consider to be a silly question. Can I do this? Should I do this? Does it matter if I put this information in? Can I ask that question? They want the ability, when you introduce new technology, obviously with a really heavy focus in the industry around data security and privacy, to know exactly what they're allowed to do and what they're not to do. I think that was really important, that we gave people an ability to ask those questions confidentially so that they were able to move on and to start to explore it to the absolute best of their abilities. But as I spoke about before, it's the continued training that's the key part of it. Keep educating people, keep providing resources, whether it's publicly available stuff like through the Microsoft Learn portal, or whether it's training sessions that we run through L&D. It all combines, but you have to keep training people. And I think the biggest thing that we found in the end was that they just needed help with prompt writing. That's the key to using foundational tools like Copilot. If you ask good questions, you get good outcomes as long as the information it's running on is solid. But if you ask simple questions, you generally get simple responses. So we put a lot of effort into prompt writing and prescriptive guidance about how to write good prompts, how to structure good prompts as well.
I imagine that stuff gets shared in the community as well.
Yep.
Once people find a prompt that's valuable and they can extract good information out of, they'll share it pretty quickly, in my experience.
Yeah, and what we've done for the broader rollout, pushing out into 1,200 people across our whole of org, we're really lucky to work with Microsoft and engage them through their accelerator program to bring on a partner to run a structured training and adoption program for whole of org. As part of that, we've got access to a library of around about 60 short videos that we've been releasing on a staggered basis. So we release one once every week on a Friday. Generally, it's a 60 to 90-second clip of, hey, have you seen you can do this? And it shows them through Copilot how you can go and try and do different things, whether it's putting in a really complicated technical document and asking it to simplify it for someone that's not from a technical background, whether it's cross-comparing two reports. We release those on a week-by-week basis in our channel, so people have got that constant reminder of, hey, have you tried this capability? Have you thought about this? And it's the constant refresher and reminder in that channel.
So as you move through this process from 30 up to a couple of hundred, up to the 1,200 whole of org deployment, how did you go about quantifying the productivity and efficiency benefits being realized from the tool?
Value and benefits in generative AI are such a popular question that's going around through the whole industry. And I think we've taken a view of it from a couple of different dimensions. I like to call them the 3Ps, but essentially we look at it from a productivity standpoint, i.e., are we being more efficient? Are we being more productive? And that generally materializes in, are we saving time with specific processes? I think a really good example there that I'm happy to speak to is financial advice team. We have about 50 comprehensive advisors at UniSuper. They've got requirements to document specific file notes following an initial review meeting that they have with a member. They historically have had to jot those down by hand after meetings, and that can take anywhere up to 30 minutes, depending on how detailed you need the note to be for regulatory purposes. We've now got that through leveraging our Copilot capabilities, but also building in a Power Automate workflow that's completed straight away now. At the end of the meeting, it takes the transcript, generates structured, populated file note template, and then the advisor does quality assurance. They go and review it, they make sure it's accurate, and that might take them 5 minutes. And then if you look at that value at scale, so 50 advisors having however many meetings per week, saving 25 minutes every time over the course of a year, it's materialized, we think, to about just shy of 2,000 hours. It's a really good example of where we've got a defined productivity benefit. And that's the first way, so productivity. But then people, it's the people experience. I think more and more now, it's a general expectation of employees working in large financial services organizations that they're going to have access to these tools, because the way in which they're going to work, again, it comes back to that point I made before, is that we want them to be spending their time on high value added skill-based work. If you're a financial advisor, we want you speaking to members. We want you doing what you do best, what your core skill set is. We don't want you spending a heap of time documenting file notes afterwards. So it's that balance between how do we let our people do what we've brought them in to do and take care of as much as busy work as we can. And then I think the third part is process. Through experimenting with Copilot and other generative AI capabilities, where are the processes that we're identifying that maybe they're not optimal? We've tried to use AI, we've tried to use Copilot with specific process, and we found that it's not working, but it's because the process itself doesn't work. For example, if we're trying to use Copilot to help summarize paper-based forms that are handwritten and it's struggling to pick up the handwriting, well, probably an indication that we should have digitalized that form in the first place. Those three areas of productivity, people experience, and process improvement are the three ways that we've really looked at the value provided by generative AI and Microsoft Copilot.
In the annual review for UniSuper, I talked a little bit about the way that AI technology may evolve from an organization-wide perspective, and we're talking a lot more broadly than Copilot here. But do you want to just give us a sense of, at a high level, how that conversation is progressing within the organization?
UniSuper has really clear and deep ambitions on the fact that we want to be a leader in retirement. And our CEO, Peter Chun, often speaks about the fact that we look at the Netflix of retirement as our motto. And that essentially speaks to the fact that we want people to have personalized experiences that are tailored to their needs. If you look at the retirement life cycle, we want to make sure that we're interacting and engaging with you in a way in which it sets you up for the best possible outcome in retirement. We think generative AI is going to have a really big role to play in how we both understand and engage with our members, and equally how we increasingly allow and enable digital self-service for our member online mobile app platforms. We really want to know more and more about our members so we can get really clear and personal with the way in which we interact with them and the way in which we provide them support, whether that be through financial advice, whether that be through next best action prompting. But we want to be really clear that we know more about you, and then we're going to leverage generative AI to help execute on different experiences for you as a member. We do have several large-scale strategic projects that are underway at the moment to look to deliver on those ambitions.
From an emerging technology perspective, though, and from your functional perspective, what's next?
Copilot, if we look at it now, one of the real benefits we've seen is that our people really use the tool. Our uptake rates are really high. We went live with licenses for everyone in September, and we had really high, strong utilization rates in the mid 80s from a percentage perspective when we went live, which is also to be expected when you do training because it encourages people to get on the tools. What we've been really encouraged by in the new year since everyone's come back is our rates are hovering at about 80% active utilization, which for an organisation of 1,200 people, that's a really strong rate and something we're really encouraged by. But what we've seen on the flip side is that ChatGPT and other public-facing AI platform utilisation rates have gone down quite significantly because our people are using Copilot. So they're using it heavily and it's being taken up really strongly. Now that delivers two things. It substantiates why you've gone with the tool and equally it improves our risk posture. But I think what we see now, and it's obviously very, very public, talk about the agentic AI experience and what we're really looking to do now is to double down. Where are the areas where experimentation with Copilot has identified that there are processes that we have that are relatively volume based, but are relatively consistent in the way they're executed, so that we can look at what are the agentic support functions that we can provide. If you think about something like IT service management within my space, is that generally the process we follow to manage and triage IT tickets and issues when they come through is relatively consistent, but we also get quite a few of them because that's the nature of IT service management, whether it's something as simple as people struggling to reset their password or whether it's access issues. The way in which we triage those is pretty simple and consistent. So those areas are the ones that we've found are really ripe for extending automation around that. So we're exploring several opportunities there. Equally with our project delivery lifecycle, the way in which we manage project status reporting, the way in which we document business requirements when we're doing new projects, the way in which we test changes that we do. These are all areas that are relatively consistent in the way in which they're operated, but they're volume-based because we do a lot of projects as a big super fund. So we're looking to expand beyond just using Copilot into how do we build out agents that are trained for specific purposes and tasks within those life cycles that can support our people further in a more consistent manner. Looking at Copilot Studio as a low-code, no-code development platform that we've been experimenting with there with some support from Microsoft and some strategic partners. So we've got quite a few initiatives in place there to extend and further double down on our Copilot investment. Another thing I'll probably touch on is we have quite a few software as a service providers, and what we're finding more and more is they're deeply embedding our capabilities into their baseline products. So it becomes not just what are the areas where you can look to develop further capabilities like what I spoke about with Copilot Studio, but also make the most of what our SaaS providers are giving us. Atlassian's a really good example. We use Jira and Confluence within our project lifecycle, and there's lots of features and functionalities that are being built into that product that they've rolled out. But then it becomes more of an enablement process because these capabilities just pop up in releases. So we've got to make sure that we give our teams the right level of training and support to make the most of them as well.
Just quickly on the agentic stuff, because you mentioned RPA much earlier in the conversation. Is there a possibility that some of the use cases that had previously been defined for RPA will just leapfrog into the agentic space, or are they going to be two different things? Because RPA has been traditionally associated with more probably low value, high volume automations versus agentic, I think, is targeting a little bit further up the ladder in terms of a higher value kind of interaction.
I think there's definitely still a place for robotic process automation. And I think we take the approach of not just doing AI for the sake of AI, which comes back to the business problem piece. We want to make sure that if there's a challenge, we want to look at all the alternatives that we have to be able to fix that. In some instances, as you said, if it's low complexity but high volume, RPA may well be the best solution for that. Equally, there are other scenarios where generative AI will be the best solution, and we take that on a case-by-case basis. But I think what we've seen is that, particularly within the Microsoft stack, there's a lot of crossover between what you might be able to build from an agent perspective in Copilot Studio, but blending in Power Automate capabilities as well. I think that's the example I gave you about our advice file notes solution, that it's built in Copilot Studio, but it weaves in Power Automate into the workflow. And I think that's what we're seeing more and more, is that those two work hand in hand, and that's obviously really strategically designed from Microsoft.
Anything else you wanted to get across that you think we missed?
Maybe the only thing is that everything keeps evolving at speed. A lot of my function is staying across what's emerging on a day-by-day basis with how quickly the capabilities are evolving. Like you see DeepSeek come out. Reality is that DeepSeek probably doesn't have a huge impact on us, but what it does have an impact on is if the way in which they've developed that technology is as it's stated, then it's going to have an impact potentially on the broader environment and how big companies like Microsoft and Google and others price their product. So monitoring those things really carefully, but there's changes every day. It's a very evolving space, and it's a real area that businesses like ours need to stay really tight to what's evolving in the market.
That's the episode for this fortnight. Stay tuned for the next episode, and for all the latest headlines and happenings in Australian technology news, head over to itnews.com.au.